The Bamboo Bridge. Chapter 1: A Stranger in the Rain. The valley slept beneath a veil of silver rain, the sky weeping gently into the soil, as if mourning something long forgotten. Trees stood like silent sentinels, their leaves trembling with every drop. The winding forest path, no wider than a deer's trail, had turned to dark, ribboned mud. The storm had come suddenly the day before, sweeping through the mountains with wind that screamed like a hawk. Branches had snapped, rocks had shifted. The bridge, the only passage into this secluded part of the world, had been torn loose, its ropes frayed like hair, its planks scattered like broken teeth in the current below. Now, with the worst past, the rain had softened to a steady whisper, and along the path came a figure, hooded, soaked, his robes clinging like a second skin. His name was Koji, though the valley did not yet know it. Each step was an effort. His boots squelched in the wet earth. Thorns caught at his sleeves. The cold had entered his bones. But there was something stronger than discomfort pulling him forward. A hunger, not of the stomach, but of the spirit. A longing he could not name. He had heard whispers in a distant town about a monk who lived far from all others, in a valley that did not appear on maps, a man who spoke rarely and answered no questions but to those who stayed in silence. Koji had followed those whispers through forests, across ridges, and now, despite the washed-out bridge, into the unknown. The path narrowed and dipped, curving around a hill. And there it was, a cabin, modest and old, built from weathered cedar and stone, with a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney. The stream nearby murmured like a storyteller lost in thought. It was a place that did not announce itself, that asked for no attention. Yet it seemed to wait. Koji approached the door and paused, unsure whether to knock. Rainwater dripped from his hair into his eyes. He raised a trembling hand and tapped the wood. The door opened almost immediately, as if the old monk had been expecting him. Senzu, his face carved with lines of time and patience, wore simple robes and held a cup of tea. His eyes, dark and calm, took in the stranger without surprise. "You're wet," he said. "Come inside." Koji bowed, more from instinct than understanding. He entered the cabin, where the mire welcomed him first. It painted the walls with golden warmth, casting flickering shadows that danced like forgotten memories. Senzu handed him a towel, then silently poured another bowl of tea. Koji sat cross-legged near the hearth, warming his hands before reaching for the cup. "The bridge behind me, it's gone," he said. "I barely made it across. I thought I would fall into the river." Senzu nodded, as if Koji had merely commented on the weather. "Storms take what they wish, but they also give." "I was on my way to find someone," Koji continued. "A teacher, a real one. I've sat in temples, listened to chants, studied scriptures, but nothing stayed with me. Their words felt like smoke." Senzu sat opposite him. "And what is it you seek?" Koji hesitated. The question was too simple. He had prepared for deeper riddles, cryptic metaphors. But this man spoke plainly. "I want peace," he finally said, "but not the kind they talk about in chants. I want something real, something that doesn't disappear when life changes. Peace that does not vanish," Senzu repeated. "You are not the first to come here with such a wish, nor will you be the last." He sipped his tea, then looked toward the stream. "You may stay, but I offer no teachings. I offer tea, quiet, and chores." Koji blinked. "No guidance? You'll find what you need if you learn to look without reaching." The silence that followed was not empty. It pressed gently on Koji's chest, as if inviting him to breathe differently. That night, Koji lay on a woven mat in the corner, listening to the wind speak through the eaves. His muscles ached, his mind raced, but beneath it all was a strange stillness, like a lake beneath a frozen surface. Outside, the stream carried pieces of the broken bridge toward places neither man would ever see. But inside the cabin, something had begun to mend. Chapter 2. The Rhythm of Stillness. Each morning in the valley began not with alarm, but with breath. Koji awoke to the hush of mist settling over the stream and the smell of pine soaked in dew. The cabin, though small, seemed to breathe with him, expanding and contracting with the quiet rhythm of life, untouched by haste. Senzu was always already awake, sitting by the water or sweeping the stone steps, his movements deliberate and without urgency. Koji watched him for days, trying to decipher the meaning in every gesture. There was no schedule, no scripture, no formal instruction, yet each hour held a lesson, whispered through chores and silence. Koji chopped wood, though the fire was never low. He swept paths that no one walked. He fetched water from the stream, though the cabin's pots remained full. With each repetition, he began to feel something stir, not clarity, but space. His thoughts no longer swarmed. They slowed, like leaves drifting downstream. One evening, Senzu invited him to sit outside as the sun bled into the hills. "Have you noticed the wind?" the old monk asked. Koji nodded. "It changes direction often." Senzu smiled faintly. "It doesn't resist the mountain. It moves around it." Koji pondered that as they listened to the branches sigh. In time, he stopped asking questions aloud. He found answers in the grain of wood, the weight of a pail, the reflection of stars on water. Peace came not as a moment of revelation, but as an unspoken agreement between breath and world. The valley did not teach through speech, it taught through presence. And Koji, once desperate for wisdom, began to feel full with the simplicity of being. Chapter 3. The Weight of the Axe. The sun rose slowly behind the ridgeline, casting long, pale fingers of light across the valley. Koji stood outside the cabin, holding the axe. Its handle was worn smooth, the blade dull but heavy. He had split wood every morning since arriving, yet today the task felt different. Senzu had left at dawn without a word, disappearing into the trees with his staff and a bundle wrapped in cloth. He had not said when he would return. Koji stared at the stump in front of him, the stack of logs beside it. A breeze stirred the pine needles. He tightened his grip and began. The first swing was clumsy, glancing off the wood and jarring his wrists. He gritted his teeth, adjusted his stance, and swung again and again. For the first hour, his thoughts clung to questions. Where had Senzu gone? Why today? What was the lesson? But as the rhythm of the axe took hold, the thoughts lost their urgency. Each swing was a breath, each impact a letting go. Wood split, sweat dripped, time softened. Midday arrived unnoticed. The stack of firewood grew. Koji paused only to drink from the stream, letting the cold water cleanse more than his thirst. When he returned to the axe, he noticed something strange. The logs no longer looked like obstacles. They invited the blade. The resistance they offered was honest, and he respected it. By late afternoon, his muscles trembled with exhaustion, but his mind was still. No images, no noise. Only the pulse in his ears and the slow certainty of effort. He sat on the stump, watching the breeze ripple across the grass. And for the first time since he'd arrived, he felt alone without feeling lonely. Evening came, and still Senzu had not returned. Koji lit the fire, made a simple broth, and ate in silence. He left a bowl by the door, just in case. As night fell, he sat outside, the axe across his knees, listening to the valley breathe. Then footsteps, soft, slow, unmistakable. Senzu emerged from the trees, his robes damp with evening mist, his bundle now light. He nodded once and sat beside Koji. They said nothing. The silence between them had changed, no longer filled with seeking, but with something shared. "You swung the axe," Senzu finally said, not as a question. Koji nodded. "It wasn't about the wood." Senzu tilted his head. "It never is." They sat there until the stars brightened and the fire burned low. And though no wisdom had been spoken, Koji felt he had learned something that could not be written down. Chapter 4. The Broken Lantern. The days passed like quiet pages turning. Morning mist rolled down the slopes, blanketing the cabin in softness. Koji fell into rhythm, chopping wood, fetching water, tending the fire, sitting with Senzu in long silences that no longer felt empty. Each gesture became a lesson, each pause a kind of mirror. But it wasn't until the lantern broke that Koji began to understand what he had truly come here to learn. It happened on the 7th evening, just after dusk. Koji was lighting the small lantern that hung outside the cabin door. Its thin paper walls had weathered many seasons, patched in places by Senzu's careful hand. Koji struck the flint, brought the flame to the wick, and for a moment the soft light flickered to life. Then a sudden gust came from the east, stronger than any that day, and the lantern slipped from its hook. It tumbled down the stone steps and shattered against a rock. Koji froze. He stared at the broken frame, the torn paper, the fragile flame snuffed out. Shame rose in him, fast and hot. He had failed at a simple task. He picked up the pieces, cradled them in his arms, and went inside. Senzu looked up from his seat by the hearth. He said nothing. Koji laid the remains of the lantern gently on the floor. "It broke," he said. "I wasn't careful. The wind came, and I didn't catch it in time." Senzu looked at the pieces. "So it broke." Koji waited for more. Correction, disappointment, perhaps a lesson. But Senzu returned his gaze to the fire. The silence that followed was not heavy, but Koji could not bear it. "Should I repair it?" he asked. Senzu sipped his tea. "You may. But should I? Or should I make a new one?" Senzu did not answer. Koji stared at the broken lantern late into the night. The paper was beyond repair. The wood cracked. He could try to make something of it, but it would never be the same. When he finally slept, his dreams were filled with flickering lights and storms that spoke in riddles. The next morning, Senzu was gone again. No note, no sound. Koji was alone with the chores, the valley, and the broken lantern. He placed the pieces in a basket and sat by the stream. He watched the water tumble over stones, each movement complete, unregretting. He gathered bamboo from the grove below the ridge, remembering how the lantern had been shaped. Slowly he began to cut and bend the strips, using twine and care. He did not try to recreate the old one. He let his hands find the form on their own. It took him 3 days. On the evening of the 3rd, as the sun sank behind the pines, he lit the new lantern. Its light was soft, different from before, but steady. He hung it from the same hook. The wind came again that night, but gentler, and the lantern swayed without falling. When Senzu returned, he said nothing. He looked once at the lantern, nodded, and went inside. Later, as they sat by the fire, Koji said, The old one couldn't be saved. Senzu replied, "It taught what it came to teach. The rest was up to you." Koji sipped his tea, and for the first time the silence felt like light. Chapter 5. The Bridge Rebuilt. The frost had begun to cling to the edges of the leaves, and the morning smelled of wood smoke and earth. Koji woke before dawn, stirred by something he could not name. The valley was silent except for the gentle sound of the stream. He stepped outside, wrapped in a thick robe, and watched the stars vanish slowly as the sky lightened. He remembered the broken lantern, the axe, the stillness, the silence, and Sensu's gaze that always saw more than it said. There was one place he had not yet returned to: the bridge. When Koji first crossed it, the bamboo planks had felt brittle underfoot. Some were cracked, others bowed. He remembered how the stream had rushed below, louder than it seemed now. Back then, he hadn't noticed the loosened ropes or the tilt of the handrail. He had simply followed Sensu across without question. Now, weeks later, he stood at its edge and saw what he hadn't seen before. The structure was failing, quietly, slowly, but failing. He crouched and examined the bindings. The knots were frayed, the bamboo split. He touched the railing and it gave slightly under his palm. Without thinking, he returned to the cabin and fetched the hatchet, a coil of new rope, and his small pack of tools. Senzu watched him silently but made no motion to stop or help. Koji crossed the bridge carefully, then stepped down into the cold stream, rolling up his sleeves. For hours he worked, stripping away ruined parts, cutting fresh bamboo, tying new bindings. He moved without urgency, but with certainty. Every gesture was deliberate. The stream numbed his feet and hands, but he did not rush. He remembered Sensu once saying, "A rushed repair breaks twice." So he moved like the water, constant, patient. By midday, the bridge was half renewed. The sun fell across the valley like a blessing. Koji sat in the grass and ate rice from a tin bowl, his hands stained with sap. He looked at his work and felt neither pride nor doubt, only readiness to continue. He thought of the path beyond the bridge. Where did it lead? He had never asked. The idea of leaving no longer frightened him. The valley had not caged him. It had shown him himself. When the bridge was finished, Koji stood at its center and looked back toward the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. The lantern swayed gently in the wind. Senzu stood by the door, watching. Koji raised a hand. Sensu raised one in return. That night they sat outside, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The stars were brilliant above them, the kind of clarity that only comes after a hard frost. Koji said, "I repaired the bridge." Senzu nodded. "Did it teach you?" Koji looked toward the dark silhouette of the trees beyond. "It taught me to return differently than I came." Senzu smiled. "Then it is stronger than before?" Koji was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Was the bridge ever about the crossing?" Senzu chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Perhaps it was about standing still in the middle." Koji let the silence stretch. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere far off, an owl called. In the morning, Koji packed his things. Not everything, only what he needed. Senzu gave him a small pouch and a folded note. "Don't read it now," the old man said. Koji nodded. He crossed the bridge one last time, steady-footed, the sun behind him, and the valley wrapped in mist remained still.